Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Lisa K. Donner, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Barr. And this is The Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, is in full cleanup mode, and one agency is about to feel the pain of it all. The U.S. Agency for International Development, or in common language, USAID. Well, they spent $50 billion, capital B, in taxpayer funds. And by the name, it should be a good thing, right? Here's what you might not know. The purpose of this mammoth agency is not aid-oriented at all, but instead acts as an arm of the State Department and is, in a sense, an extension of the Central Intelligence Agency, the spooks. Lisa, I want to start with you. You wrote a really eye-opening piece this week, and then pivot to Graham. Where'd the money go? Where's it coming from? I mean, I never even heard of this agency before this week.
Oh, good questions. I put down a few things, but first, let me just explain. USAID does not stand for aid. It stands for the United States Agency for International Development. It's actually kind of a way to embed the U.S. into other nations in order to exercise, and Dave can speak to this, what's known as soft power. So they help out the State Department, and maybe that's why they ultimately put it under the State Department. But anyway, the purpose is to provide information, in-country information, to the CIA. So USAID it's just a mushrooming agency, spent $72 B as in $1 billion in 2023. And they do have a sugar daddy. And I will give credit to Joe Schaefer, who on our site way back in 2020 made a connection between George Soros and USAID. But I digress. Here's a breakdown. $16 billion last year to Ukraine, $1.6 billion to Ethiopia, $1.9 billion to Jordan, $1 billion to Afghanistan, and in the vicinity of $1 billion for Somalia, the Congo, Syria, Nigeria, Yemen, South Sudan. It's crazy. And you have to look at it this way. What are they spending their money on? Okay, $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and businesses. $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. No
I don't even see that being well attended in Colombia. I'm sorry.
A transgender comic book in Peru. And my personal favorite, $20 million to fund Sesame Street in Iraq. Now, there is some reason for soft power advantages to aid money, but I'll let Dave handle that. But we've got to be good stewards of what the taxpayers are giving us. And I don't think this is the stewardship that the American people was hoping for.
So Graham, is the State Department and the CIA, just how connected are those two in USAID? It seems like the CIA, that's her whole job anyway.
Well, there's always been a rather incestuous relationship between the State Department, USAID, or, back then, years ago, it was just called AID. But them and the Central Intelligence Agency, back as far, you can go back to 1972 and Senator Edward Kennedy claiming that USAID money was going to the CIA to fund its guerrilla war in Laos. And the CIA kind of fought back against that allegation, but apparently a lot of that was kind of documented. USAID money,
probably true, Graham.
USAID money was definitely going into Laos, but they were saying it was going in to fund health programs. But then in the early 2000s, USAID contracted a company that operated out of Costa Rica, and this company was tasked with creating a social media platform similar to Twitter for Cuba. And the idea was that it was essentially being used to gather information in Cuba and also to kind of foment a certain amount of instability. The company in question, interestingly enough, was called Creative Associates Incorporated. That's right, CAI. And that company actually spent a lot of its time doing kind of destabilization work in Cuba. And it was getting money through the State Department, through a State Department program. It was getting money from USAID. So there's all a very convoluted relationship there.
I'm sort of interested, Sarah, in what Dave has to say, because there is some national security issues at play here. Dave?
Yeah, it's absolutely, Lisa. I mean, for example, USAID has been caught funneling money through a cutout in Michigan to actually pay for meals for Syrian terrorists. And one has to wonder what in the world that has to do with either the CIA or the United States foreign policy. This is an agency that has gone rogue, and I'm not even sure that the CIA has any control over it. It's just a propaganda arm of a rogue, woke, social justice agenda that people have totally lost control of. To give you an example, we just got kicked out of Uganda and Chad. And why? Principally because they really do know the difference between a boy and a girl, despite what USAID might push on them in terms of a woke agenda. So you've got to, they have just gone rogue. If you've ever worked with USAID, you know how obdurate and difficult it is. It's either their way or the highway, and they can't even put a highway around Kabul.
I'm still having a hard time trying to figure out how any kind of investment in foreign, to gain intelligence has anything to do with gender studies or gender identity or transgender musicals. I don't get that. And how does the State Department even benefit from that? Who's benefiting from this? Nobody. Are they? Somebody tell me I'm wrong.
I can tell you.
Okay.
Am I up next? It's part of a globalist agenda that uses those doctrines to confuse people and keep their eye off the ball. And if you look at the USAID, you'll see that it does, as Graham said, go way back. But I'd like to use a lens that you sort of suggested, that who could be against this? And if we look at this, what's going on right now through the American partisan lens, we've heard histrionic howling from people on the left saying this is going to traumatize all sorts of people. And Ilhan Omar and particularly Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut said that this supports freedom fighters around the world. And both of them and others are saying it's unconstitutional what they're doing, to take them apart. It's illegal. It's tyrannical. Well, if we start looking, and I think Elon Musk and others, given their strong statements, will be showing us what this agency has actually been doing. It has been acting illegally, unconstitutionally, and tyrannically against Americans' interests, and not limited to DEI. There was also $500 million for Nepal to spread atheism. Is that a church and state problem? Or are we just establishing religions in other countries? And even if sending millions of dollars to Vietnam to promote EV cars was good for the climate, which it isn't, why are we funding their cars? So I think Americans who are upset right now at the false charges that this is somehow eviscerating these vital humanitarian programs, I think when they start seeing the truth, they might say, well, no, actually, I don't support censoring U.S. journalists, supporting activities that discredit journalists who question our activities in Ukraine, that discredit Tucker Carlson as an agent of the Russians. There are some things coming out right now that suggest this agency has been really dabbling in areas that are very much against our interests, regardless of the DEI stuff. And then one allegation is that it was funding a public relations campaign on behalf of the pesticide industry to discredit the journalists Michael Pollan and the other fellow, Mark Bittman. And these are very credible journalists who have warned about toxins in foods. You would think all Americans would want to make us healthy again. if we don't have bipartisan agreement that this agency, to the extent it is engaged in, actual humanitarian aid, in actually winning the hearts and minds, for instance, of people in Afghanistan with a hospital. Well, Rubio, Secretary Rubio, has said he's not there to destroy the agency, but to realign its interests with what is the best interest of the U.S. And what a lot of people who are howling out there against this activity are going to look awkward about later is that this was the agency we later, decades later, found out was allied with the lovely Kissinger in his 1974 Kissinger report, which called for a globalist organization to further the national security interests of industries to secure the natural resources of developed nations. That was prepared in 74. It wasn't released till 89. And from a look at the documents, it looks like the memo authorizing it was not released till 2007. And what that memo shows is collaboration between, guess who? The CIA, the USAID, and the State Department and the USDA. This looks fishy to me, and anybody who doesn't want that cleaned up must be an active puppet of certain globalists or other entities that are not looking at the American self-interest. So I think some of those on the far left who have jumped the gun in condemning this action are going to have to do a little bit of a turnabout when the truth comes out, because I don't think that that Elon Musk and others are making the very strong charges against this agency without some proof to back it up. And I think we'll be seeing that coming forward.
Isn't all this, back and forth between Musk, Doge, and this USAID, USAID, sorry, and Secretary Marco Rubio, isn't that going to put him in a really tight spot? I mean, he's the one that has to navigate these waters, right?
Oh, I think that he's in the catbird seat. He's in charge, and he's going to make sure that the good things that are possible with USAID continue, and the propaganda arm and those things that are working consistently against the U.S. national interests will be taken away.
Yeah, now, John, you have put together a beautiful soliloquy on how USAID has perverted the money that has been given to it and its mission. But in its purest sense, Dave or Graham, maybe either one of you can shed some light. In its purest sense, USAID can actually do good things, because, Dave, you wrote about China was infiltrating into Africa and America was drawing back from Africa. And what they were doing was helping with schools, helping with water, helping dig wells, and do things for actual international development, which is good stuff that we should be involved in instead of wasting our money with all this crazy left-wing nonsense.
I think that's right.
Hire the Peace Corps.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, where does the Peace Corps stop and USAID begins? Are we duplicating our efforts? And where we are, we should stop that. But your point is that the USAID has the opportunity to be a positive force in blunting the impact of China and bad actors where we don't want them.
Exactly. And that's what it should be doing. And if it was doing that, it would be very helpful.
I'll be curious to see what the breakdown is, how much of its budget has been allocated in legitimate enterprises versus a shadow agency for rogues, which I think the rogues are scrambling right now because they're being pulled out in the light.
When a country is trying to gain or exert influence in the third world particularly, but just in the rest of the, across the rest of the globe in general, there's two ways they do it. They either buy influence by buying the influential people in those countries, buying them off, or you win hearts and minds by actually aiding the people who need it. And Dr. and former Senator Ron Paul once said, foreign aid is taking money from poor people in rich countries and giving it to rich people in poor countries. And so, really, if you want an effective aid program, that is great. And I agree, Lisa, we should be. There's certain aids that we should be doing in certain parts of the world for our own interests and also altruistically to help certain other people in other parts of the world. But, the aid has got to go to the people who need it and not to the people who are just given the responsibility of distributing it, because then they distribute a large quantity of it to themselves and their friends.
I'd like to see the white paper on why we have to give this amount of money to these people. I would love to see that.
Why is it the Palestinians are so pro-Hamas? Because he who has the gold rules. And, you know, this country has always had the gold, and we've squandered our, what's the word for it? We've squandered our power, I think, in many ways by using it for stupid stuff like this. Hamas uses money to, you know, to pay and feed and clothe a lot of these Palestinians, which is why they're loyal to them.
Right. All right, guys, we got to wrap this one up. Cutting government waste is a good thing. Well, maybe. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens, and I think I'll pass on asking the CIA for any kind of answers. Thanks for watching. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. The Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Sarah Callaghan. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.